Hey e-commerce marketing podcast listener, do you want to get discounts to top online marketing tools? We have worked hard to get discounts to tools such as OSI Affiliate, SellHack, Ninja Outreach, FreshBooks, and so much more. You can get these discounts by visiting getosi.com/discounts or by texting getosi to 33444. These tools will help you get more traffic, sales, and conversions for your online store. Get the discounts right now by visiting getosi.com/discounts or by texting getosi to 33444. Welcome to the e-commerce marketing podcast. Today's guest is Yehoshua Coren, and he is the founder and principal consultant of Analytics Ninja. It's a boutique digital analytics consultancy which provides implementation, reporting, analysis, and training services to organizations of all sizes. Yehoshua is a recognized expert in Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager, and he helps organizations strategically determine their digital measurement needs and then proceeds to implement best-in-class deployments of Google Analytics and other tools based upon said requirements. Welcome to the podcast, Yehoshua.
Thanks so much, Robert. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Before we get into Google Analytics and digital measurement, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started, and how you ended up focusing and making Google Analytics your niche?
Sure, I'd be happy to. That's a great question. So I was offered a job by a friend of mine about 10 years ago. He sold cabinet hardware, an e-commerce network of niche sites selling knobs and handles. And he asked me to come in and work on his SCM and SEO team. I didn't really know much about it at all at the time. So first he put me on his SEO team. And I was like, well, I'm not really interested in that. And so he said, okay, try PPC. So I started working with AdWords. And I mentioned to him, I was like, hey, did you know that there's this software, Google Analytics, that they just launched this e-commerce tracking? He's like, oh, great. Why don't we put it into place? And it's not that they didn't have analytics and measurement. It was homegrown systems. But because of the ease of use of the Google Analytics interface and the integration with AdWords was so close, it made it much easier for me as a PPC manager to measure the impact of my ads and their performance. So that was my first real getting into Google Analytics, was using it as a performance marketing tool or to measure the impact of my AdWords. Shortly thereafter, probably about a year, I moved on to be in-house doing PPC for a B2B furniture company. And analytics was critical. I really needed analytics to optimize the PPC, and was very successful that first year that I was with the furniture company. And as a result, they gave me a lot of open space to look into different ways that we could leverage analytics in particular to improve the efficiency and optimize PPC even more. After a few more years, I basically was like, well, I'm not really as interested in the PPC side of things per se, but I'm deeply involved in analytics. I had started my blog in about 2009. And about 2 years later, just around the beginning of 2011, I opened up my consultancy after I felt that like I had some level of competency with Google Analytics. And since then, I've just been speaking at conferences and making myself more well-known in the analytics community and servicing larger and larger clients, helping them with their strategic implementation, reporting, and analysis.
Okay, that's really an amazing story on how you got into analytics. Something interesting you mentioned, you said that you find the environment easy to use for you, but that's why I'm excited having you on the show. A lot of businesses, some always feel overwhelmed when it comes to tracking, and Google specifically, and knowing their way and how they can navigate within that environment. Having you on the show, can you tell us how e-commerce businesses can actually utilize Google Analytics and Tag Manager to become successful?
Sure. There's a lot to that question, so I'm going to unpack some of the different aspects to it.
Okay.
First of all, Google Analytics is not a simple tool. Okay, there's lots of complexity to it. There's literally hundreds of dimensions and metrics, and that's for sure overwhelming. And one of the things that I've experienced working with companies who may be newer to Google Analytics is that there's a pretty steep learning curve. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to downplay that. I mean, Google Analytics is not some sort of magical software that you just look at it and insights jump off of the page from your reports and now you know how to optimize your business. That's not like that at all. So in order to be successful with analytics, one aspect that companies need to take into mind is what is required to have proper adoption of analytics within their organization. That involves training and professional development. That's a part of it. And that's to whatever extent they have the human resources to handle that in-house versus whether or not they outsource their analytics as well. Meaning I've been working with Google Analytics for about 10 years, and that's given me a lot of experience. That's why I'm able to work with companies and step in as an expert, because that's what I do all day. I spend my time with Google Analytics, and I can help advise them. So to that point that you mentioned, Robert, that pain point of, oh my goodness, I am overwhelmed by Google Analytics. Yeah, I don't doubt it. And for people who are feeling that way, there are a lot of great resources out there to learn the tool. So when I first was getting started, I spent a lot of my time reading blogs. And there's a lot of now there's more formalized trainings, either online trainings or webinars or even in-person trainings. The amount of material out there for people to learn, both paid and free, definitely exists. The free material is harder to sift through. There's so much content out there about Google Analytics. It's hard to find what's good and not. And there's a lot of good paid courses out there too. So I just want to say that for people feeling overwhelmed, that's okay. It's healthy. It's a very complex tool, but you'll definitely have a chance to learn with online resources. Okay, that's number one. Number two is like, what else does it take to be successful in e-commerce with analytics? And that sort of segues into a lot of the work that I do with clients that has to do with strategic implementation. One of the misnomers that people have sometimes about Google Analytics is, I can just put this little piece of code on my site and then voila, magic, I can make wonderful business decisions. And that's usually not the case. The real process for getting value out of analytics is to first map out what are your business objectives and what are your business questions that are supporting them. Once you have an idea about these are the types of questions I'd like to be able to answer with my analytics, then you can evaluate, well, do I even have that data? Okay. And the types of data that could be available in Google Analytics most likely is not going to be there right off the bat without any work in terms of configuring and customizing your data collection. Let's give maybe some examples. If you're e-commerce, knowing customer history in order to do segmentation within Google Analytics would be really, really important. But if you're not passing any of that customer data into GA, so you're not going to be able to segment by it. Even something as simple as, is this customer a new customer, or are they a return buyer, or have they made 3 or 4 purchases in the past year? Right, so something like a count of purchase would be something that you would want to send to Google Analytics as a custom dimension, a piece of customized data. So there's a lot of different customer data points that you would want to use to describe the users who are on your site.
So let me cut you off real quick. So
please.
Where does an e-commerce business go to find the variables that they need to customize their Google Analytics so that they can send that information back to Google?
Right. So that's a great question. So it's the first place is defining what those variables are.
Okay.
Right, defining what do I want to describe. Usually for e-commerce, I want to describe my customer and I want to describe my merchandise. So merchandise has a lot of taxonomy. You have products on your site and you want to describe what it is. And so if it was retail, I would want to know, or apparel, let's say apparel, I'd want to know the type of apparel. Is it a shirt or are they pants? I might want to know its size and color. Right, that would be appropriate for apparel. If it was shoes, I'd probably want to know the shoe type. Is it a running shoe or is it a dress shoe? Potentially its size or color might make a difference there as well. So whatever it is being sold has like a bunch of merchandising data around it. So I usually think of things as entities, or in technical language, you might call it an object. So you have customers, you have merchandise, you have content on one site. So I have a page, and I would want to know what type of page is it. Is it a category page? Is it a product page? Is it a blog page? And that way you can begin to sort of break up both the experience of the user on your site about what types of pages are they seeing, what type of products are they viewing and interacting with, and who they are.
And does Google have a library of all these objects where you can go and grab so that you can add it to your analytics code?
The opposite, meaning Google in their free version offers up to 20 of these custom dimensions. So really it's up to each individual business to decide, well, these are the customizations or the custom types of data that I want. Once the planning has happened, then you have to turn to the developer. Okay, so there needs to be a little bit of a translation of a business objective into a specification for a developer, right? So if any e-commerce platform has a lot of this information in its application, right? Application being an application like Shopify or Magento or WooCommerce or something like that. Any of these applications have ways of defining what are the products on the site. That's how it shows it on the page. So all of the variables of saying, well, this is the price of the product and this is, how much of it's left in stock or is it on sale. All of these attributes for a product are part of the e-commerce applications, and they exist in the database for the e-commerce application, and exchanging it into a value that can be sent to Google Analytics is something that needs a web developer, somebody who can say, okay, we need to take the fact that the database knows that when I'm viewing a product page, this is a pair of pants, and I need to put on a variable on the page that says product category pants. In order to do that, that's just, you have to map that out. And then you say to the developer, okay, put something on the page that says product category pants as a variable. And that translates into something that then gets populated into a custom field in Google Analytics. So when you see what's happening, you say, oh, they viewed pants. So let me give a little bit of an example what that looks like in Google Analytics.
Okay.
A few years ago, they launched a platform called Enhanced eCommerce. This was a big deal for them because it really was a major upgrade in terms of how Google Analytics tracked interactions with products. Now, all of a sudden in Google Analytics, you had this idea of there's such a thing called a product. And now I can take a lot of actions with relationship to that product. Okay, so the product itself will be described. It has a brand. It has a name. It has a SKU. And it has a categorization. Those are the dimensions that describe products. And then there's actions you can take with regards to the product. I can see it in a product list. In other words, like a product category page has a bunch of products on it on a category page, and that's an impression. All of these were viewed by a user on a category page. In other words, the potential buyer, the user, was given an option. That's called an impression. And then the user can take an action, and that's usually what we call a click, right? Oh, I have 10 items in front of me on a category page, and I clicked one of them. So that's a product list click. You put those two together, and you get a CTR. You get a click-through rate to see, which are the most popular products based upon their position on a category page. The next step in the Google Analytics reporting has to do with a detail view. Detail view is simply a product page, and so did the user see an individual product? And you can see that by a list of all products by name or in groupings. Let's say views of pants or views of shirts or views of shoes, okay, for apparel. And by having that detail view be the verb, right, that basically says, oh, the user has a little bit more intent, or they're looking into this a little bit more because they're viewing a product page. The next step would be the add to cart. So now you can divide how many times were these product categories added to cart compared to other product categories. Or you could see on an individual product level, what's my most popular product added to cart. And in this case, popularity would be dividing the total number of add to carts by the total number of detail views. That gives you, again, a CTR, a ratio that says, oh, this is how likely this type of product is to be added to cart versus another type. And the final steps are moving through the checkout and then finally to the purchase. So if you sort of match the funnel there, this progression of seeing something from a category page to a product page to adding it to one's cart, checking out, and then finally making a purchase, you get a whole set of reports that basically shows shopping behavior. And that was a few years ago. That's when they launched this enhanced e-commerce. And there's a lot of e-commerce businesses out there that aren't taking advantage of that yet. They haven't upgraded to the enhanced e-commerce platform. One barrier to that is that it requires development work. People actually have to read the specification, know how their back-end application is working, and do some coding and make some significant investment to make that work. But the payback is that you get all this information about your merchandise performance within your site, because the product itself now sort of exists independently. It's the same product that exists on a category page and on a detail page and within the cart and at point of sale. That's basically the nuts and bolts of how Google Analytics nowadays is able to help people see the progression of a product through its sort of lifetime on the site. It's a sort of a close-minded approach, right? They try to make a one-size-fits-all approach to e-commerce, and I think that's a failure on behalf of the platform, because a lot of e-commerce experiences don't match that. And people who are listening to this podcast will be like, well, that's nice, but I could actually add to cart from my category page. So it doesn't really work with all scenarios, but it's the most common scenario. And for many e-commerce stores out there, it will match, like going from a category page to a product page to adding to a cart and then purchasing.
Okay. So quick question. I know you're a Google expert, but are there other software tools out there that people can use instead of using Google? Because it requires a developer. In some cases, if you're not a developer, can I just go ahead and use maybe Mixpanel instead of Google Analytics? Are there other platforms out there that are similar and might be easier than Google Analytics?
That's a good question. It depends on the type of data and reporting that you want. Short answer is no. I think for most of any sort of e-commerce specific reporting, you kind of do need that developer, because otherwise any tool, that tool can be Mixpanel or Kissmetrics or any form of analytics tool, Adobe. If it doesn't have the variables to describe, well, what product is the user looking at, what product is being added to the cart, right? You want to describe your products. You need merchandise data to be rich and descriptive. You need customer data to be rich and descriptive. All that really just requires a surfacing or to the analytic software that it has these variables. So that's going to exist with really any platform. One particular platform which I will note that does things a little bit differently than Google Analytics, and I'm very intrigued by the way that it's built out, is something called Heap.
Okay.
Heap Analytics. Now, Heap Analytics is unique in that it automatically tracks every click. Okay, so there's no developer work needed to track where people are clicking on the site. What you can do in order to get meaningful reports, because otherwise it's just this whole data dump, and that doesn't have any structure to it, so it's not meaningful to look at. You put Heap Analytics on your site, you're not going to see meaningful reporting until you configure the tool. But that tool configuration happens in the software as opposed to on the data collection side. So there's like a WYSIWYG editor where you can go in and you can start clicking on things and give it your own name. So for example, let's say you wanted to track add to wish list. okay, for if you have that functionality on your site. So instead of having a developer have to create a tag that said, oh, when person clicks this button, fire the add to wish list. We want to define that action as an add to wish list. You can actually just go into the interface and click on that add to wish list button and then define it as this action was called add to wish list. This action was called add to cart. Okay. Now it doesn't have the merchandising information about what was added, and it doesn't have the customer information like who added the item to the cart. But the click tracking, which is a big piece of analytics because it shows user behavior and potentially their intent, is somewhat simplified for people without the technical background because they don't have to do the tagging. They just have to go into an interface and do some clicking. So Heap Analytics is something for people to consider. I don't think it's a replacement, from what I can tell at this point, for Google Analytics on the e-commerce side in terms of the e-commerce reporting, but it is something worth looking into.
Okay, here's another weird question. Do you think some e-commerce businesses can just forgo not having Google Analytics for now? Let's say maybe the business just started, or it's kind of growing, or it could be a big business. Like, can they delay and forgo looking at Google Analytics and prioritize and look at other areas of their business before they start measuring or before they start getting insight? I know it sounds crazy, but is there a situation where you would advise, okay, maybe you guys don't need to look at analytics for now, look at something else? Like I said, it's a weird, crazy question, but I'm curious to see what your perspective is on that.
So there's not going to be a real rule of thumb to answer that sort of question. I can't provide guidance without specifics for a company, but I'll still take a stab at it a little bit. Within organizations, there's a certain level of maturity within the business, and when it comes to analytics maturity, as well as capability within the business. Okay, so let's say that the e-commerce business, they're going to invest $25,000 to do a best-in-class Google Analytics implementation and configuration. Okay, but they don't have anybody who even knows the tool. They can't make heads or tails of the reports. They're completely overwhelmed by their regular data in GA. So that's not really a company that should be spending time, investing on data collection. Right? They don't even have people who can use the basic aspects of the tool. There's lots of different types of data points that companies can use to help inform their business decisions. But web analytics fills a specific role, meaning being able to see what is user behavior on an online platform. If you're an e-commerce store, like that's where you collect your data. Is usually saying, well, how are people interacting with my store online? That's really the role of digital analytics tools. So it'd be hard for me to say, yeah, don't look at that. But, I would probably say, oh, you're not ready to look at that because you don't have the skill set. Yeah, so learn up, try to figure out how to make use of digital analytics data to help make good decisions. There's other things that may be useful for businesses that are not really web analytics related. And that's just simply merchandising analysis, right? Getting an idea of, what are their products? What's selling? Where they're having issues potentially in stock? What types of products should I be launching for next year? What are my next steps? And making sure that you have great merchandise that people want to buy. That's not necessarily a digital analytics question. So that can, in many cases, have a bigger impact on the bottom line of a company. Just focus on how do we make the best damn product and get that word out to people. Ultimately, you need to measure that. I can't say that you wouldn't actually look at your analytics to see am I being successful, but looking at your ERP or just your bottom line, that can provide some insights too. Yeah, we launched this new product and it's selling like hotcakes because people love the product. So that's sort of dance around a little bit and answer your question, maybe, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely answered it, and I was just curious, but it's always important to know your numbers. So all businesses should be measuring the numbers and making sure they understand the numbers so that they can glean and get some insights from what they're measuring and looking at. I know we've barely scratched the surface looking at Google Analytics, but we're kind of running out of time. Are there some resources where you can point people on how they can learn more about using analytics, setting it up? Maybe it's your blog, your website. What are some resources you can point people to once they finish listening to the episode? Where should they go to next to start getting more information on the best practices on GA?
That's a great question. I wish you had thrown me that one in advance. I would have prepared some sources for you.
We can just say your blog. I mean, you cover it.
Yeah, I could, but I don't think that's really what my blog does. My blog is a little bit more. I think it's a little bit more advanced and a little bit more niche. I'll give you a colleague's blog. Online Metrics has a lot of blog posts that have that sort of thing. I think that would probably be the best starting point, potentially based upon your question for your listeners. It's online-metrics.com. There's a lot of guides for how to get up to speed with things, and including a number of roundups of like, here are the best resources to get started up with. So I'm sure that Paul, who's the owner over there at Online Metrics, has a good resource of resources, So, and you can even go to the online-metrics.com, and at the top there's a link towards free resources. So a lot of good information out there online, and that would be a good starting point.
Okay, and
not the only place, but it's a good starting point.
If people need to reach you, how can they reach you?
They can Google my name and go to my website.
Okay, you can Google.
It's Yehoshua Coren. It's Yehoshua Coren, Analytics Ninja. So just Google Analytics Ninja, come to my website, fill out a form, or send me an email, ninja@analytics-ninja.com. Don't call me because I don't really answer the phone, but you could send me an email and I'll reply. I'd love to hear from you listeners out there.
Okay, Yehoshua, I really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing some knowledge. I'd really love to have you back on so that we can continue this conversation. It was a good start. We barely scratched the surface, but I would really love to have you back on.
It'd be my pleasure. It's one other area that people will be happy to engage in conversation is Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Analytics Ninja. So just Analytics Ninja on Twitter, and that you'll be able to find me there too.
Okay, Yehoshua, thank you again.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the eCommerce Marketing Podcast. Join the eCommerce Marketing Podcast Facebook group to learn, connect, collaborate, and grow with other e-commerce marketers at getosi.com/FB. Subscribe to us on iTunes by searching for eCommerce Marketing Podcast, and please leave a rating and a review. Thank you for listening. See you next time.